All right, everybody. Welcome back again. I'm really excited today to have an opportunity to do something we hadn't done before, which is to actually compare two different cars with two different drivers, same track, same day. I was lucky enough to be at VIR last fall. Happened to be there with a friend of mine who has a Camaro ZL1 and was out on the track at the same time. And he was nice enough to loan me some of his PDR data so we could actually do a comparison. So this is going to be same track, same day. I believe it's actually the same session. They were just cut short on one side. And let's see what's different between them. For starters, this is on the Corvette side. It's my 2017 Corvette Z06, the Z07 package. I do have the DSC Sport controller in it, the AP Racing brakes, and also I was running a set of Pirelli scrubs at the time. So these were 18-inch wheels with 305, 660, 18 front, 315, 680 rear. I'm kind of giving you all that detail just so you can compare it against the Camaro. This Camaro, as far as I know, was bone stock, so it's a 2017 ZL1, not a 1LE, but it is with the automatic transmission. So this is pretty cool because it's got the 10-speed, and we can actually compare the 10-speed against the Corvette 7-speed as well to give you a feel for that. It was run on the stock tires, so the stock Goodyears that came with the ZL1. As you'll see, that's a big part of the story, I think, is actually comparing the tires. But let's get started with kind of what's the most common thing you hear about, or at least I hear about, when people talk about C7, Z06s, and the track, and that's overheating. I'll say that I've got 3 years now of tracking a C7 Z06, two different ones. I've actually never had them overheat, and I've had them tracking in temps in the mid-upper 90s. But the Camaro's got a lot more cooling capacity. Chevy makes a big point of advertising this. It's got a larger front end. It's got extra radiators, and you're seeing kind of similar cues going on with the new Corvette ZR1 that's coming out. So let's take a look at the actual data from the cooling system itself. So again, here we've got two different sessions. So this lower box here, this is actually the Camaro data. This top box here is actually the Corvette data. And you can see a couple things. First of all, outside air temperature is something they have in the Camaro and they have in the newer Corvettes. And this allows you to see that it starts out high. The car was probably sitting and just had to get some airflow over the sensor. But in the end, it's roughly 82 degrees outside. Same time with the Corvette, outside air temperature also 82 degrees. So really a nice apples to apples comparison. In this case, it was also a pretty humid day. So I'm not sure what effect that exactly is going to have on cooling, but just have that as a data point. So let's look at kind of the last lap of the session. So we'll just do 7th lap to 7th lap. Again, same amount of time on track to make sure that's not a factor. And at the top, coolant temp for the Camaro was a 222.8, exactly the same for the Corvette. So coolant temps stayed exactly in the same place. Intake air temp, you'll see in the Camaro, it ran pretty darn close to ambient. It was only a degree off of ambient at 82 degrees. The Corvette, this is pretty typical. This is where I always see mine, is right about 10 degrees above ambient. So 93 degrees. Shouldn't be a big horsepower killer, but it's definitely, the IATs aren't as well in check as they are on the Camaro. Oil temps on the Corvette, you're seeing 275 degree oil temps, 275 degree oil temps lap to lap. At the end of the session, it was up to 278 for me for the Corvette. If you go down to the Camaro here, you're actually seeing a good bit higher oil temps. So they've got this, it's about over 10 degrees, 13 degrees higher on the oil temps. Looking at the trans temp, again, you're seeing fair amount higher, at least at this lap to lap from the Camaro to the Corvette, 278 degrees on the Camaro. And looking at lap 7 on the Corvette, it was only 255 degrees. By the time I got to the end of my session, though, it was 276, 277, so it was fairly similar. The other thing, though, is, again, we'll look at some actual data traces, but look at the maximum lateral acceleration between the Corvette and the Camaro. So it's 1.45 on the Corvette, 1.26 on the Camaro. So good bit more grip. Those of you who've heard me talk before know that I know I'm running slicks. I know there's a A lot of folks that believe that's good for like 2 seconds a lap, or they've got a ton more grip. Honestly, my experience in looking at the data, when you compare something like these Pirelli scrubs against a set of Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s, frankly, they're very similar in their performance. The lateral grip, longitudinal grip are all very, very similar from what I've seen. So, if we were comparing stock tire to stock tire, you definitely have a real edge still with the Corvette over the Camaro's good years. So let's look at something else that's interesting. Before, in other videos, you may have seen me do this effective torque channel. My next video, I'm going to show you how I actually created that. But what I did here is effective torque is specific to the Corvette manual transmission. And so what it does is take the engine torque request channel coming out of the car, multiplies it by the gear ratio of the transmission, and you get an effective torque going to the differential. I created a second channel here called effective torque A10, where I'm doing the same thing, but I'm using the 10-speed automatic in the Camaro's transmission. And as you can see, it's a little cluttered. I overlaid them. So what we need to do is actually hide some of the data that doesn't make sense, because obviously the Corvette data isn't 10-speed and the Camaro's data isn't the manual transmission. So if we go over here, the red channel is the Camaro. So we're going to go ahead and just highlight the blue channel for A10, hit H to hide it. And up here, we will do the exact opposite. And so now you can see over top of each other the torque output from the automatic transmission in the Camaro compared to the manual transmission in the Corvette. And it's pretty neat. I mean, you can see, coming down the front straight before we get to the brake zone, the torque being put to the I should also point out that I also applied a correction factor here because the differential ratio, the final drive ratio is different for the Camaro, and the tire size is different as well. So this should be true apples to apples. And again, you can see, there's 50 more foot-pounds of torque coming down the front straight. You can see here, we'll talk about this some more, but a little bit of difficulty getting the power down in the Camaro. But once he does, he's got almost 100 more foot-pounds of effective torque being put down through smaller rear tires too. That's also worth mentioning. The Camaro has 305 rear tires, whereas the stock Corvette size are 335s. I'm actually running these 315 slicks, which work pretty well also. Again, huge differences between them. Over 100 foot-pounds of torque when you go full throttle to full throttle in most places. Here it kind of evens out. But those low speed kind of grunt off the corner, if you can make it grip, especially here coming out of Oak Tree, you're going to see the Camaro is going to have a lot more effective torque being put down. So let's go ahead and look now at the actual inputs. And again, here what you see is coming down the front straight, there's about this 5 mile an hour delta, 4 or 5 miles an hour, sometimes a little more, a little less. Again, I think that's probably just getting a slightly better launch off the last corner, and then less drag with the Camaro, the Corvette compared to the Camaro. And I talked a little bit about the tires and lateral acceleration. This channel in the middle, right where I'm dragging my mouse across, I have this labeled as lateral acceleration AV. Another math channel. I love my math channels. This particular one is just taking the lateral acceleration channel and getting the absolute value of it. I do that because it's a little bit easier to read if you're just looking for peaks, because normally lateral acceleration is going to go positive one direction, negative the other. You've got to try to remember where 0 is. So here it's just a straight up absolute value of it. So you can see, a similar trace going around turn 1, but the actual lateral G's, it's about 0.2 higher the whole way. Some of that may be a lack of confidence. I know this was a relatively new car to the driver. He's a very good driver. I should say that right up front. He's actually, frankly, a better driver than I am. You'll see some technique things that I've learned from actually watching his videos. Another thing that's kind of interesting you'll see is the squiggly lines on the screen. So this is the Camaro video off on the right, the Corvette video on the left. The squiggly lines, unlike with the Corvette, the Camaro, when PTM kicks in, this isn't active handling, this is actually PTM kicking in. You'll actually see this show up in the PDR video, and we can validate that real quick by just actually adding that channel. So, and where is the traction control active, and you can see right here where PTM is kicking in, coming out of the corner. So lots of torque, lots of traction control going on here to try to help put it down. Take that back out again. And from a speed perspective, again, you'll see just looking at the trace, probably had a little bit of a style difference. It's worth noting that the driver of the Camaro had a lot of laps in the same range. He had a lot of these 205 ones, very low 205s. I know he was trying to get in the 204s. I think the car can get there. It will certainly get there with better tires for sure. But you can see lifts off a little bit earlier. We got to the brakes about the same time. You could say there's more pedal position, more pedal movement. He's also more consistent on the brakes than I am. Some of that can probably be attributed to just different pads, different pedal feel. I actually don't know whether this car had stock brakes or not. I don't believe it did. I think he would have burned those to the ground if they were stock pads. They were probably stock braking system. But then here, coming out of turn one, you can see I very quickly get to the floor, and we'll zoom in actually. I very quickly get to the floor with the Corvette. Whereas the Camaro, you're having to modulate the throttle. You've got traction control kicking in. You're basically fighting it, trying to put that increased torque with the A10 to the ground with smaller tires with less grip. So it's probably a little bit of a handful here. One of the tricks I learned was he's actually carrying the accelerator much longer into the left-hander that is turn two. So that's a trick I'm going to work on next time. This lap actually wasn't too bad for me, but I looked at some of the other laps, and he's actually gaining a lot on me in this section, and you can kind of see it in the time trace. The other thing, zooming back out, if you see this little kind of blip in the time trace, he goes much deeper into one, slows down more, and then squares it off more and gets back on the gas. So you see there's a momentary loss of time and then gains it back as he gets back on the gas. I think, again, if that car was able to put the power down better, that would make an even bigger difference in lap time. Over here, we see this is turn 3 VIR. So let me back up a little bit. This is braking for turn 3, the fast left-hander at VIR. Let me bring up a map real quick just so you can see where it is. You know, this big, fast, sweeping left-hander. I think that's NASCAR Bend, it's known as. And you can see he had to slow quite a bit more than I did to make that turn. But he's back on the throttle actually harder sooner, and very quickly gets back up and actually ends up being faster than I am by the exit of the corner. So possibly style difference, possibly a function of the car requiring him to slow more, but still pretty interesting. So let's skip forward a little bit. This is coming out of the lower S's. And at this point, we're both pretty much full throttle all the way to the turn in for the climbing S's. And so if we zoom in some more on that section, you can see the speed starts out coming out of the S's with, you know, about a 3 mile an hour, 2 mile an hour, 3 mile an hour difference. And really, it maintains all the way. So both of us are foot to the floor all the way to where we lift. It's about a 3 mile an hour difference. So you could see that the acceleration of the Camaro and the acceleration of the Corvette are actually very similar along this section of the track. And then again here, we're both lifting. We're both, you know, having to make the climbing S's. He drops more speed going in, but again uses more throttle. And again, I think this is just a function of him being a much better driver. Uses more throttle and actually gets his speed back up. So by the time we're in the middle of the S's, our speeds are again very close. I mean, here it's 120 to 120. It's a dead even match. So from a time perspective, also, you know, go back to this straightaway. You know, we end this straightaway where we both lift with a 3.8 second delta. We started it with a 3.3. So the Camaro did lose half a second in that section, just from that 3 miles an hour difference all throughout the section. But again, if we could have, you know, probably on a different lap comparing them, you'd see if we came off with similar speed, you'd probably see a similar speed at the end. Let's go ahead and back out again and take a look at the rest of the lap. And again, turn in for 10. Again, he slows up more than I did, but again, gets back on the gas sooner and very similar speeds on the run down the hill. Actually, I'm passing a car. And then we get down to going into Oak Tree. Very similar situation. Remember, the Camaro is 300 or so pounds heavier than the Corvette. So 300 pounds heavier, not as grippy tires, smaller tires. I have a feeling this thing with, a good set of slicks on it probably be a pretty a monster. But the minimum speed going through Oak Tree is a good 10 miles an hour slower, but he's also got a car ahead of him. So it's one thing where video really pays off. I didn't realize this until just now as we were talking about it. He's coming up on a car, so he probably had to overslow for that car, or else he probably would have been a lot faster through there. So it's always interesting to see how much does an event like that cost you in time. So hypothetically speaking, just look at this bump in the time delta. We went from 4.64 to 5.1, so that was probably worth 4/10. So, 3 or 4/10, that tells me this Camaro easily would have been down into the high 204s with a clean lap, and that's one of the difficulties with these cars. But coming out of Oak Tree, again, slight speed advantage. Let's zoom in again on that straightaway, power to power. We're entering it with about a 2 mile an hour delta, and they're very similar all the way down the back straight. There's kind of a little bit of a gain, the Z06, kind of above 140 or so. You see it start to peel away right about here, and then I have to shift, so he catches right back up again with my slow manual shifting comparison. And again, we are neck and neck all the way to the brake zone. So at the brake zone, there's, 0.2 of a mile an hour difference. So again, the car really accelerates. The Camaro accelerates with the A10 every bit as fast as the Z06 does with the manual. And again, now this is breaking into the top of the hill, going down the roller coaster. No real surprises here. Fairly similar techniques. Again, we see the slightly more slowing. Again, not quite able to carry as much speed down through roller coaster. That could just be feel of the suspension as well, and not necessarily grip. But again, once we get back to full throttle, and I'm actually back to full throttle a little sooner, I can put that power down. But again, you see the slight time advantage or slight speed advantage the Z06 has to start gets lost as we start shifting. So, here I have a 7 mile an hour speed difference. After I shift, it's down to a 2.5 mile, 3 mile an hour speed difference. After I shift again, it's down to less than 1 mile an hour speed difference. So that A10 is really making up some speed on the Corvette, even though it's a heavier car with more drag as you accelerate down the straights. So I think that's it. Hope you all enjoyed it. The next car comparo that I'm hoping to be able to do is I'm hoping to get my hands on a new ZR1 when they come out. When that happens, you will see lots of comparison. That should be a lot of fun. Just looking at the lap that Jim Merrow and GM posted, that car is going to be a monster on the straight. So again, post up if you have any questions. Please subscribe. My next video, my plan is to actually talk about math channels. I know I've kind of thrown a lot of them at you here, and you probably want to know how to do that yourself. Some of them are easier than others, and we'll cover that on the next video. Thanks.